And what is at stake when a new pope dons his robes? In a celebrity-crazed century, Karol Wojtyła, Pope John Paul II was an unlikely pop idol. The first non-Italian pope to be elected in more than 450 years, he was seen in more places and by more people than anyone in the history of the world. Now with his passing, 128 cardinals will gather in the Sistine Chapel to be sealed from public view. They will have a monumental job on their hands, electing one man from amongst themselves to become the next pope.
Once a pope dies, that's when the real election process starts, because then the cardinals start talking to one another. International phone calls are going to be made. They're going to go to Rome, and they're going to size each other up and decide, is this the man that should be elected pope?
There's also an element in every kind of human interaction like this of ambition, a certain amount of competitiveness. I think the hope is that is minimized, and that through prayer and a common love for the church, that won't take over, but these are human beings, and the stakes are very high.
As they arrive in Rome, the cardinals will carry on a succession process that Catholics believe began in Israel nearly 2,000 years ago. As related in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is said to have told his apostle Peter, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and I will give unto you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." With these words, Catholics believe Jesus ordained Peter to be the head of the church on earth, the first pope.
The tradition and the little bits and pieces we have from the New Testament indicates that he was impetuous, he was strong-willed, but on the other hand, obviously Jesus saw something in him that suggested leadership qualities. And he was, in fact, the leader of the original apostles and functioned in that capacity.
After the death of Jesus, Peter, along with the other disciples and converts, traveled throughout the Near East proclaiming the new faith. It was a hazardous mission.
The powers that were in place in those early centuries, of course, saw Christianity as a threat. Any religion which shifted the focus away from the emperor to some other object, in this case Jesus Christ, was a threat to the empire. And that's why the emperors, some of them at least, were so vigorous in trying to crush Christianity. And so you had loads of martyrs in the early church.
Peter was able to avoid that fate until he wound up in the small Christian community in Rome. According to Christian traditions, it was there around 64 AD that the Roman Emperor Nero had Peter crucified upside down.
Peter died in Rome, and of course that's one of the reasons Rome is considered a sacred city, because Peter, the first pope, died for the faith in Rome.
Yet even though tradition and legend have designated Peter the first pope, historically the record is very murky.
Some people think that, Jesus set the whole thing up, and he laid down very precise rules, like the founding fathers of the United States with a constitution and all kinds of organizational grid. That isn't true.
We really know very little about the earliest popes. We don't really know how they were chosen. We don't know how long they served.
A lot of people will be surprised to learn, Catholics and non-Catholics alike, that there was no single Bishop of Rome functioning as the Bishop of Rome, or as we know today, the Pope, until the middle of the 2nd century.
In fact, historians believe that until about the time of Pope Anicetus in the year 155, the early church was run by groups of bishops rather than a single pope. Although Catholic traditions cite Linus Anacletus and Clement I as the first popes after the Apostle Peter, They were not popes as we know them today. They were more like chairmen of the committee that ran the Church of Rome. But it could be a dangerous job.
Persecution had bred great holiness, martyrdom. If you were a Christian, you risked your life and your livelihood.
By the 3rd century, the Roman Empire was divided by civil war, plague, and disease. In the year 312, the warlord Constantine captured Rome and became emperor.
Constantine shrewdly judged that the empire was already becoming Christian, and he very deliberately decided to present himself as a Christian emperor, conquering under the sign of the cross. And he said that he saw 3 crosses emblazoned in the sky. "In this sign conquer" was written in fire under them.
Then, in a move that would forever change the new faith and the world, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, making Christianity the religion of the empire.
Once Emperor Constantine made the church the official church of the empire, everything changed. He endowed them with churches. He built huge basilicas for them. Suddenly the church began to become politically powerful. Suddenly the church began to be wealthy.
Constantine built this basilica over what was reputed to be Peter's grave. 1,000 years later, it was demolished to make way for the crowning glory of the Vatican, St. Peter's Basilica. It is here in the Sistine Chapel that the College of Cardinals, the highest-ranking prelates in the Church, will elect the next pope. All but 10 of the 128 voting cardinals have been chosen by John Paul II.
Everyone thinks that because John Paul II named over 90% of the cardinals who will elect his successor, that his successor will be a photocopy of himself. That's possible, but the history of the Church and the history of papal elections shows the opposite. Most of the time, popes are succeeded by individuals who are very different from themselves.
That doesn't mean, however, that there will be a major shakeup inside the Church.
We're not going to suddenly see a new pope come out and say, "Oh, I'm going to ordain women tomorrow." I think we will see continuity within the Church.
The actual process of electing a new pontiff is called a conclave. In Latin, to lock with a key.
When the cardinals go into the conclave, they are really locked in. They are isolated. No telephones, no newspapers, no radio, no television, no email, no DSL lines, nothing.
Cardinals have had the power to elect a pope for over 800 years. Pope Alexander III gave them that right in the year 1179. Pope Alexander hoped by restricting the choice to cardinals, it might keep elections out of the hands of interested parties outside the Church.
Time and again, outsiders, principally political outsiders, kings, princes, have sought to manipulate the election of popes. They want a friend on the throne, or they want the throne for a friend.
By the 10th century, the whole process became corrupt.
It became effectively the plaything of certain powerful Roman families, the Theophylax, the Crescentii, and others. And literally teenagers were elected, or 20-year-olds were elected, people who had no qualifications whatever, not only no qualifications to be the Bishop of Rome, but not even to be a priest, to be a religious leader.
One of the non-priests was John XII, who in the year 955 donned the papal robes at 18 years of age. His opponents then, and many modern-day historians today, claimed he turned the Vatican into a brothel. It didn't help matters that his death by stroke some 9 years later seemed to have occurred during an act of adultery. To help prevent such scandals, Pope Alexander III stipulated that in order to become pope, the man elected would need a 2/3 majority of the cardinals' votes. Alexander's reforms, however, created a new set of problems. It literally could take years to get a two-third majority, as happened after the death of Pope Clement IV in 1268. For 3 years, the papacy was vacant, while the cardinals wined and dined and bickered in Viterbo, outside of Rome.
Well, the people of Viterbo got sick and tired of this, and so what they did is they locked them in a room and told them they weren't going to let them out until they elected a pope. So they put them on bread and water, figuring that that would speed up the election, and that still had problems. So finally what they did is they tore the roof off the room where they were in, so the rain and the weather came in.
The wind-blown cardinals finally, albeit grudgingly, elected a pope. By contrast, the upcoming papal election is expected to be a peaceful and holy event, not at all like the rudely interrupted election of Pope Celestine II.
A gang breaks into the conclave, and they put a sword at the man's throat who had just been elected to get him to resign, and then they force the cardinals to elect their own candidate.
Thus, in the year 1124 was Honorius II crowned pope. Coming up next, the crazed and homicidal Pope Urban VI.
Enter the combat zone.
The world has never seen an army like that before.
Face off against your enemies. Fight alongside the greatest war heroes. And head to the front line in the most powerful and technologically advanced machines of their time.
Technical advantages often spell the difference between life and death.
The biggest battles, the greatest weapons, and the history behind it all. Tonight at 8:30, Combat Zone, only on the History Channel.
First Edition is really like nothing else on breakfast television. We'll bring you news, business, sport and weather when you need it.
In 2005, Sky News will bring you even more live breaking news coverage.
It's all about immediacy. With Sky News, there's no need to wait.
First Edition, News Hour, 5 Live, Evening News, around the clock, on the hour, every hour. Sky News, Australia's news channel.
One small step for man.
Are you a skeptic?
You have to stand up and be counted.
Do you have all the facts?
That is what the average person thinks.
Do you believe? Can you make judgment?
The answer is yes, not twice.
Do you know the story?
We can change our future.
Conspiracy Files, Fridays 9:30 on the History Channel.
In Rome, they say, popes come and go, but the papacy remains. During the 20th century, 9 popes have occupied Peter's chair. In 1903, when Pope Leo VIII traveled through Rome, he was transported by horse or by a portable throne. Over 75 years later, Pope John Paul II journeyed by popemobile, helicopter, and jet aircraft. Yet if modes of travel changed relatively quickly, many methods of electing a pope have remained the same. For 800 years, the rule has been that a pope must be elected by a 2/3 majority. But in 1996, Pope John Paul II changed the rules. Now, if the cardinals are deadlocked for more than 2 weeks, they can vote by a simple majority to elect the pope. Many observers, however, believe a modern election would never stretch over 2 weeks.
I don't put much stock in that. I'm not concerned, it would look bad. The world out there is saying, what's going on in there? Are they having fights? They can't agree? I thought the Holy Spirit was involved in this. They can't recognize that 1 or 2 of their number are obviously picked by God.
However, throughout its 2,000-year history, divisions within the church were so severe that sometimes 2 rival popes actually ended up ruling at the same time. The rival claimant is called an anti-pope, as opposed to the incumbent, who is officially recognized as the true pope.
Now, in the history of the Catholic Church, we've had as many as 39 anti-popes. Some of them were more serious contenders than others.
The first clash over who was or wasn't the official pope erupted in the year 217 between the liberal Pope Callistus and the ultra-conservative anti-pope Hippolytus.
They were fighting so much, and their factions were battling, so that the pagan soldiers came in and broke up the fights and arrested both Hippolytus and Callistus and sent them off to the tin mines in Sardinia.
Today, there is little chance of an anti-pope being elected, and the odds are very low that the next pope would rule from anywhere but Rome. But it has happened in the past. In the year 1305, a conclave sat deadlocked for 11 months as pro-French and anti-French cardinals battled inside. When the French cardinals finally prevailed, they elected the French Pope Clement V.
The political power was really in France rather than on the Italian peninsula. And the French temporal rulers were able to get their own people elected to the papacy and then induce them to come and move the headquarters of the papacy from Rome, which was in dilapidated condition anyway, to Avignon in southern France.
For a period of 70 years, a succession of 7 popes ruled from the fortified city of Avignon. Compared to Rome, their new home was peaceful and church government more efficient. As a result, the papacy became wealthier. Yet with its wealth came nepotism, extravagance, and corruption.
Kings and nobles would want to make their third or fourth son a bishop, or their illegitimate son. And this tended to, corrupt the leadership of the church, because these people took these jobs not because they felt called by God, not because they wanted to live holy lives and serve the people, but because they wanted to be in charge of these rich institutions.
Some of the popes in that period were not bad popes, and others were awful popes. They were just figures whose philosophy was, we have the papacy, let us enjoy it, that type of thing. And they lived the lives of princes and bon vivants, and ran great parties and dinners, and were a scandal, really, to anyone who knew what was going on.
The papacy's 70-year exile at Avignon came to an end in January 1377, when Pope Gregory XI, the last French pope, finally returned to Rome. A deeply religious man, Gregory believed Rome to be the only place for a pope, and the papacy has remained there ever since. In 1996, Pope John Paul II made another change to the electoral process when he eliminated the ancient election method called by acclamation. By acclamation meant that all the cardinals present at a conclave had to simultaneously shout the same name of the future pope. This method was used in 1378 after Pope Gregory XI's death. But in that conclave, their vote by acclamation was forced out of them at the point of a sword by the concerned citizens of Rome.
They were very much afraid of another Frenchman getting elected and returning the papacy to Avignon. So when the election occurred, the Italian mob came in and said, we want an Italian, we want an Italian. And so they elected an Italian.
There was only one problem.
They elected Urban VI in 1378, whom many historians have described as being mentally unstable.
It turned out Pope Urban VI was torturing and killing the very men in the College of Cardinals who had elected him. So the cardinals elected another pope, Clement VII, the anti-pope, who split Christendom into 2 opposing factions.
So from 1378 until 1415, you have a period now when you had at least 2 people claiming to be pope. And then after 1410, when they try to end it by saying, okay, let's elect someone else. You 2 guys get out of the way, we'll elect the 3rd guy, and the other 2 wouldn't resign. So now they had 3 popes.
For the church, it was traumatic. Not only were there rival popes, but now there were rival colleges of cardinals, bishops, and abbots. This period of nearly 39 years was later called the Great Schism.
That lasted for decades until the Council of Constance, which basically got all of the anti-popes, all of the popes, to either resign or simply impeach them, and then they elected a new pope. But it was a time of chaos, a time of great division in the Church.
The council that ended the Great Schism also set a precedent. In emergencies, even a pope was answerable to a church council. Today, as a new pope is about to be elected, that idea may be more relevant than ever before.
One of the problems that the Church faces in the 21st century is the fact that modern medicine can keep someone alive and functioning way beyond the time when they're capable really of doing their job. And in the Catholic Church, you know, the Pope is elected until he either resigns or until he dies. There's no known procedure for dealing with a Pope who becomes incapacitated, or if a Pope became mentally unbalanced.
Since the Apostle Peter, there have been 266 official popes, as well as 39 anti-popes. 78 have been declared saints. 177 have been Roman or Italian, 14 French, 11 Greek, 6 German, 6 Syrian, 3 Sicilian, 2 Sardinian, 2 Spanish, 2 African, 1 English, 1 Dutch, 1 Portuguese, and 1 Polish. 4 have abdicated, 5 have been imprisoned, 10 murdered, 1 openly assassinated. 1 died of wounds received in the midst of battle, another after a ceiling fell on him. And continuously, for the last 600 years after each death, the College of Cardinals has met here in the Vatican's Sistine Chapel to select the next pope from amongst themselves.
And of course, a cardinal has to be careful not to present himself as if he wants the job. You're supposed to not want the job. And if someone says, oh, you'd make a good pope, oh, well, not me, of course. Not I, Lord.
So anyone who's actively campaigning to be pope, typically that does him more harm than good.
But if it is considered unwise for a cardinal to declare himself a candidate, how does he run for the papacy?
They make themselves known for having a specific kind of position on the issues that are facing the church. And they travel around, give talks, meet other bishops and other cardinals.
And when it appears that a conclave is imminent, a candidate's most powerful supporters begin to lobby for him.
In every conclave, there are a few cardinals who rise to the surface. They're not campaign managers, but they're people whose voice and opinions are respected by the larger group. And when they speak, it's like an E.F. Hutton ad. People stop and listen.
I think there are definitely kingmakers. There are people who, to whom the other cardinals look for guidance, for their knowledge of the personalities that might be possible popes.
The real activity goes on informally in clusters of cardinals. And, you know, in their own way, they're really testing one another out. They're really trying out ideas. What do you think of so-and-so?
Unlike the cardinals in ancient Viterbo, today's cardinals won't have to worry about their accommodations.
The cardinals used to be housed inside the apostolic palace, and basically they had put up cubicles, brought beds from the seminary, and they had only one bathroom for 5 or 6 cardinals.
In 1996, Pope John Paul II decreed that the electors in the next conclave would be housed in a modern facility rather than their makeshift living quarters of the past. Their new home, the Santa Marta Hospice, has 107 two-story suites with baths. The cardinals will travel either by foot through the basilica or by bus to the Sistine Chapel. And when the conclave begins, a veil of secrecy will descend upon the proceedings. There is a saying in the Vatican, those who talk don't know, and those who know don't talk.
It's a court where everybody serves at the will of the sovereign. When the sovereign dies, everybody's out of a job. And like a court system, it's full of whispers and secrets and intrigue. And they say that at the Vatican, power is telling secrets to one person at a time.
As the conclave begins, each voting cardinal swears an oath of secrecy not to reveal the inner workings of the election. If they break this vow, they can be excommunicated. All contact with the outside world is prohibited. And for the first time, the Sistine Chapel as well as the cardinals' living quarters will be electronically swept for bugs to prevent leaks.
Secrecy at the conclave is important as a way of trying to contain factionalisms developing. One wants to have that body of cardinals together in seclusion without being influenced unduly by whatever is happening outside the world.
We as Catholics really believe that the Holy Spirit is active here. But I think, when the cardinals get together, they are going to spend time praying. They are going to spend time really thinking and talking together about, who will be the best person for the Church at this critical moment in its history and in its time.
Before the first vote, 3 cardinals are chosen by lot to distribute and collect the ballots, another 3 to count them. The cardinals use small rectangular cards as ballots, upon which they secretly write down the name of their candidate. Then, one at a time, the cardinals approach the altar where a chalice stands covered by a plate. They put the ballot on the plate and then tip it to slide their ballot into the chalice. Then a cardinal previously appointed by the deceased pope and 3 assistants count the votes. Each reads the vote aloud and writes it down on a tally sheet. After each ballot is read, a needle and thread is run through all the ballots to keep them together. After the first day, the cardinals will vote 3 times each day until there is a winner. Each succeeding vote becomes more serious as the field begins to narrow.
There's no question that there are people who promote and support a particular candidate and believe in their hearts that this is the man that Christ is calling to the papacy. But there's also shifting alliances, and when votes are taken and people communicate with one another in that setting, minds do change and hearts do change.
Based upon what's known of the process, it is important that a candidate keep increasing his tally in succeeding votes and not stall short of the 2/3 goal. As the tally mounts, a bandwagon effect can take place as uncommitted cardinals turn to the candidate whose supporters continue to increase. If it is obvious who will win on the next vote, most cardinals will go for the winner.
Once the cardinals recognize that, there's someone who has a majority vote, the cardinals that are in the minority are going to say, well, we know this guy's going to get elected. There's no point in staying around for 2 weeks, and they throw their votes to him. Why get this man angry? He's going to be pope.
Most observers would agree it's not a good idea to anger a future pope. In the year 897, Pope Stephen VII decided to take revenge against his hated and deceased predecessor, Pope Formosa. Pope Stephen dug up Formosa's corpse. Then he placed the dead pope upon a throne in his papal robes, held a trial, excommunicated him, and afterwards threw Formosa's body into the Tiber River. Stephen himself was later deposed by the disgusted Roman crowd and strangled in prison.
They took religion very seriously in those days.
And today they still do. These days, as a conclave begins, huge crowds gather outside to watch a small chimney above the Sistine Chapel. Will the smoke be black or white? After each vote, the ballots are burned. Black smoke, obtained by mixing the ballots with chemicals, means there is no winner. White smoke, on the other hand, means a new pope has been elected, and it brings jubilation to the huge crowd gathered in the plaza below, anxiously awaiting the first appearance of the next pope. When we return, the man some have called Hitler's Pope.
sick of being left in the dark? Let the History Channel shed some light on the truth.
I can smell history.
Who built Egypt's pyramids? What really happened at Pompeii? Where is the passage into the Maya underworld?
If ever there was an entrance to the underworld, this is it.
Join us for Australian premieres as the History Channel goes to extremes. Digging for the Truth, Tuesdays at 8:30.
She wasn't what the students expected.
Look beyond the paint. Let us try to open our minds to a new idea.
She wasn't what the university wanted.
Change takes time, you know? You gotta let them catch up with you.
But she's exactly
Go out dancing.
what they need.
You're the one who said I could do anything I wanted.
Julia Roberts, Kirsten Dunst, Julia Stiles, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Mona Lisa Smile. Coming soon to Showtime.
Il est la propriété. Il est la propriété.
Slaves were a commodity. Their human dimension is forgotten.
It was simply trade. Trading with people who want our gold or who want our slaves. We really can't blame the Europeans because we sold our own.
Only on the History Channel. The African Trade.
At a mere 108 acres, the Vatican is surrounded by the city of Rome, yet it is a separate nation. With a population of about 900, it features a postal service, a police force, and an army of Swiss guards. Today, when a new pope is crowned, he becomes the ruler of the world's smallest country. It all begins when the first puff of white smoke rises from the Sistine Chapel. Inside, the Cardinal Chamberlain, the leader of the College of Cardinals, has already asked the new pope if he accepts the job. When he agrees, he is asked what name he will choose. Then on the balcony, the new pope appears for the first time and gives his blessing. Two days later, the coronation ceremony takes place. One question remains. Will the new pope allow himself to be crowned with the papal tiara? It hasn't been worn since the 1960s. It is a crown which has come to symbolize the waxing and waning of papal power through the centuries.
Christmas Day in the year 800, Pope Leo crowns Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor, in Rome. Charlemagne kneels before the Pope. He crowns him with authority. The message is, your power to rule comes through the Pope.
Well, today the Pope only rules the Vatican. Once he controlled vast areas of Italy called the Papal States, a gift from Charlemagne's father in the year 754. But over hundreds of years, as the Holy Roman Empire began to collapse, the Church literally fought a series of wars to hold on to them. But as the idea of nationalism began to grow in Europe, the power of the Church in temporal matters diminished.
There's eventually a development of national consciousness, something called a Germany or a France, rather than the empire. As these seeds begin to be planted, the notion that an Italian pope is somehow going to lord it over these emerging peoples with their own national or regional consciousness becomes harder and harder to maintain.
By the time of the French Revolution and the subsequent rule of Napoleon, popes who had once crowned emperors became mere figureheads. Napoleon crowned himself as the Pope looked on.
The French Revolution meant that the Church had to deal with democracy, it had to deal with issues of liberal freedom, and Napoleon's reign following it was traumatizing for the Catholic Church. Actually, two popes were taken into custody and hauled around Europe by Napoleon. If we thought of that happening today, we'd have a sense of how traumatizing that was for the Church.
By 1870, the Church had lost the Papal States to the emerging nation of Italy. But 60 years later, in 1929, Pope Pius XI made a deal with Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. In return for recognizing the Kingdom of Italy, Mussolini made the Vatican an independent, neutral state. 10 years later, just as war was about to break out in Europe, the cardinals assembled for a conclave after the death of Pius XI.
The cardinals who gathered together knew that war was going to tear Europe apart. And so what did they do? They looked for someone who was a trained diplomat.
The man they elected, Eugenio Pacelli, took the name Pope Pius XII. He went on to become a most controversial pope.
He is condemned by some who feel that he was silent and didn't speak out against the Nazis, especially against the Holocaust. But he was afraid of speaking out too much because he was afraid he'd do more damage by speaking out. He would use this kind of diplomatic language, but the people in the West knew exactly what he was saying, and also the people in Germany weren't too happy about what he was saying.
Although he has been called Hitler's Pope, today few know that in 1940, Pius XII acted as an intermediary between the British and a group of German officers planning to murder Hitler, or that he hid 5,000 Jews in Rome and inside the Vatican itself.
I think, he's a personality that should be left to the judgment of history. I thank God I didn't have his job.
Pius XII died in 1958, and as usual, after a long pontificate, the conclave was deeply divided. They decided on a compromise.
So maybe we need some breathing space. Let's elect an older man, a so-called transitional pope who will keep the chair of Peter warm without disturbing the surrounding furniture.
The cardinals elected an obscure 76-year-old Italian, Angelo Roncalli, who became Pope John XXIII.
He was avuncular and loving and had a wonderful smile and was roly-poly and happy and embraced everybody. And he was, in a sense, the first media pope. The world fell in love with him.
He upset everybody's expectations. He called the Second Vatican Council. And again, the cliche, and the rest is history. The Second Vatican Council was clearly the most important religious event in the entire 20th century.
What John did was to kind of give an official blessing to the ferment, the reform movements from all over the church, and to do so in a spirit that was open, loving. He said, let's stop excommunicating people, let's not be in a condemning mode, let us lift up what's good in the cultures of the world.
Tonight witness the Council at Rome.
Beginning in October 1962, Vatican II began what turned out to be 6 years of work. It culminated in the greatest reforms in the church in almost 1,000 years.
All of that was catalyzed by John XXIII. He didn't create it, but he lit the fire.
But the lovable and feisty Pope wouldn't live to see its triumphs. John XXIII was losing a battle with cancer, and 8 months later, in June of 1963, he was gone.
He had a great simplicity about him, a great warmth. He was unpretentious. There's the famous story about his being asked how many people work in the Vatican, and his answer was about half.
John XXIII was followed by Pope Paul VI. The first pope to fly in an airplane, Paul VI was known as the Flying Pope. He traveled the world spreading the Church's message of reform. He also made an important change in papal voting procedures, decreeing that cardinals over 80 years old would no longer be able to vote in a conclave. But one issue would haunt and define his papacy: birth control.
In July of 1968, he issued his birth control encyclical, Humani Vitae, which reaffirmed the teaching that every act of sexual intimacy in marriage must, in principle, be open to the transmission of life. Nothing artificial, no pills, no condoms, no diaphragms. That encyclical undermined the credibility of the papal teaching authority.
Many scholars believe Paul was one of the greatest popes in history, one who had guided Vatican II after the death of John the 23rd. Yet both inside and outside the church, many believe that with his decision on birth control, the momentum created by the Second Vatican Council was brought to a halt. It was a decision that haunted Paul for the rest of his life, and one that the church has been dealing with since 1968. Next, did murder end the papacy of Pope John Paul I?
This April 25th, know the story.
It's time to check in to the final round.
Mr. Anderson, welcome back. We missed you.
We know what has to be done. Tonight, the future of both worlds will be in your hands.
The Matrix Revolutions, Sunday 8:30 on Movie One.
Australian Pensioners Insurance don't offer car insurance to young drivers. We don't even offer insurance to 45-year-old drivers. We only offer car insurance to people who are over 55, no longer working full-time. Experienced drivers like you, because we understand the benefits you want, like a choice of agreed value or market value, 24-hour accident care, professional help when you need it most. And unlike some, we don't charge you extra to pay your premiums by the month. Call 132-555 for a quote on your car insurance today.
Australian Pensioners Insurance Agency. These are the untold stories of the men and boys who fought at Gallipoli. The History Channel commemorates the 90th anniversary of Gallipoli with unseen diaries, photos, and letters home. Know the story. Gallipoli, Untold Stories. Premieres Monday, 8:30, only on the History Channel.
On September 29, 1978, just 33 days after his election, Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, was found dead in his bedroom. Almost immediately, rumors of poison, murder, and intrigue began to swirl around the papal palace. It didn't help matters that no autopsy had been performed, or that since the mid-1970s, there had been rumors of financial corruption within the Vatican Bank.
Because of the sudden death and no one being with him when he did die, and then also add to that the scandals that had already surfaced about the Vatican Bank and so forth, and people said, there's got to be some sinister plot here.
Well, there were lots of allegations that John Paul I was murdered and things like that. There's no substance to that.
The simple fact was that the Pope had a bad heart. He had previously endured 8 hospitalizations and 4 surgeries.
The Pope died of neglect. They should have made sure he had good doctors and checkups and took his medicine.
He was more of a sick man than people thought. The transition to an office of that magnitude and suddenly discovering all the skeletons in the closet, he began to see the magnitude of the corruption that he had to deal with. It may have just simply overwhelmed him.
So once more, only a month since their last meeting, a conclave assembled to elect a new pope.
It's an extraordinary moment one that hadn't been witnessed really for centuries. Supporters of John Paul II would see this as prophetic, that perhaps there was something in the character of John Paul I that would not serve the church well, and so God took him back to heaven.
They wanted to make sure they got somebody who was healthy. Well, here was clearly a very healthy young man in terms of the college cardinals. He was in his late 50s. This is a man who climbs mountains, with skis, very athletic. They were pretty sure that if they elected him, he wouldn't die right away.
And they were right. John Paul II was vigorous, intelligent, multilingual, in fact, a phenomenon. For the first time since 1522, the cardinals elected a non-Italian, the first Polish pope. As a Polish patriot, he would use his power as pope to help bring down communism, the system which had infected Poland and Eastern Europe since the end of World War II.
I think the lasting achievements of his pontificate will be in the realm of foreign policy. The role he played, and it was a significant role, in supporting the solidarity movement in Poland.
The charismatic pope helped inspire Solidarity, the first independent trade union in the communist world.
Nie może być walka silniejsza od Solidarności.
But the Pope's decision to become involved in politics had consequences. On May 13, 1981, the Turkish terrorist Mehmet Ali Agca tried to assassinate the Pope in St. Peter's Square. John Paul II was hospitalized for 77 days. But 1 year later, he was back on the road.
He was a master of the media. He communicated most effectively by embracing a child with AIDS or visiting the person in prison who had been his assassin.
And despite the assassination attempt, the Pope continued to support solidarity, democracy, and freedom in the communist world. He played a vital role in the fall of the communist system in Poland, and the rest of Eastern Europe soon followed.
I think that John Paul II is going to go down in history as the most important world leader in the second half of the 20th century. I mean, this is the man who really was pivotal in ending the Cold War, in bringing about the fall of communism in Eastern Europe and ultimately in the Soviet Union. He was the rock that started the avalanche that wiped out communism.
But he was also criticized for his authoritarian manner and his rigid views concerning birth control and the place of women within the church.
Some would argue that there was a stubbornness there and a lack of collegiality with the bishops and an insistence on his power. These are not insignificant criticisms of John Paul II, but they also come with a person of great strong will, a kind of heroic figure. Not every pope is a heroic person, and John Paul II has been that. I think St. Peter would be pleased.
But who will be next?
The safest prediction is that the next pope will be an Italian, and that he will be an Italian in his 70s.
It would be a real breakthrough to have an African pope.
Is this the time for a Latin American to take leadership, given the importance of Latin America in the church's overall picture?
Which way will the church move in the future? And with whom? All bets are off until the white smoke emerges from the Sistine Chapel. Once again, the church is at a crossroads, and soon the cardinals gathered in conclave will choose from amongst themselves the 267th Pope. Like those before him, a man who will follow in the footsteps of Peter.